You mentioned Washington. What role did he play in ratification?
George Washington attended the Virginia State Ratifying Convention and was, although he did not speak at the Constitutional Convention, he sat as chairperson. He was instrumental in convincing many people at the Virginia State Ratifying Convention. In addition, as my colleague Rachel Mangiani stated earlier, is that because he would not attend Rhode Island, that's the reason they ratified. They realized that because George Washington did not feel like he could visit this country and could not leave Rhode Island because as president he could only stay inside the country, or that's what he believed, that that Rhode Island realized how instrumental it would be in being a part of the United States.
Also, his presence at the convention was sought because he legitimized the entire process.
What about the role of newspapers? 1 minute.
The role of newspapers was very influential, and in fact, even though men or women were not allowed to vote in these elections, the newspapers were really involved in involving the entire community in this debate. Mercy Otis Warren is an example of a woman that was not allowed to vote, but she was an anti-federalist and wrote observations of a new constitution. And so this is an example of, even though these people were not allowed to vote directly, they still participated in the social contract because they're involved in informal debates and written literature.
And Professor Bernstein speculates that if it weren't for these print wars, that the ratification of the Constitution wouldn't have happened. They were very instrumental in informing the American citizens on how the government was going to work, and not just what the Constitution said, but how it was going to be implemented. We still use the Federalist Papers today to look to what the framers intended.
Very good.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I want to thank you for a very fine opening statement. We knew exactly where you stood with the question and the sub-questions. I was very impressed by some of the supportive documentation that you offered, such as your reference to the Massachusetts State Conventions, and I also found it fascinating how you chronicled some of the actual ratification convention activities throughout the process, beginning in 1787 all the way through to 1788. I was also very pleased that when I asked the question about small states' eagerness, you promptly addressed the fact that having that equal representation in the Senate was so important. So I think you did a very nice job. Thank you.
Yeah, I was struck in the opening by the reference. I guess it was in the opening, the reference to what happened in Britain after they sort of saw what the colonials were doing, and how that fermented an insistence on increasing the franchise there, and then how voter turnout. You gave the 47% figure, as I recall, on the increase in voter turnout in terms of referenda, and I thought that and your Madison quote at the beginning was off the beaten track. That is something that I at least hadn't heard before. I thought that there were times when I thought maybe your answers could have been a little longer and a little more developed, but that's a splitting hairs and sort of quibbles that point. That I would only make that to a team that's operating at a very high caliber as you are. That's the kind of criticism I could make. I wouldn't make that to a more marginal team, and you're obviously operating at a very high caliber, and it's very impressive indeed.
I liked your opening statement. I liked the reference to initiative and referendum. We haven't heard that before, so that's a new thing, and as a residual of the people's involvement with ratification, and this is a continuation of that. There were a couple times when there were mistakes made and then corrected by another person. So that was good to see. Elizabeth was searching for the right word, and she couldn't find the right word on the tip of her tongue. The word you were looking for was prohibition. Congress could not prohibit the slave trade
Thank you.
until 1808. So I knew what you were saying. I'm just letting everybody else know. You and I knew. George Mason was at the convention to the very end. He was one of the three that did not sign. There were other anti-Federalists who left. George Washington was not elected to the convention, Virginia Convention. That was a bad thing for the Virginians. They thought that was 10 votes. The Federalists wanted him there, but he didn't want to participate. But then along comes Luke, the way he did a couple days ago or so, and he says he legitimized the Constitution. And certainly that was there. And after all, when the Federalists said George Washington favors the Constitution, Benjamin Franklin favors the Constitution, who are you to oppose it? Pretty tough question to ask somebody. And so that was a good follow-up there. You were young. You were very young. And it came through on one answer. We're talking about the anonymity. And then, is it Rachel? You said it allows people to be honest in what they're saying. Well, what about Alexander Hamilton? It allows him to be dishonest in what he's saying also. And so it works both sides. You took the idealistic approach. I take the old-timers approach, that there can be dishonesty that's there. And there are a couple other things you didn't mention about anonymity. No one has mentioned that, and that is there is caning and there is dueling. We don't have those today. And so that's one reason why you want your anonymity. You don't want your opponent to be challenging you to a duel. And so anonymity is very important back for those reasons. They do get pretty dirty sometimes and very personal in their discussions and their debates. And that anonymity might save them their life. So that's another reason. I think you did a very good job. And you and your teacher and all the support that you get, including your students, your fellow students, deserve a round of applause.
Absolutely.